everyone. So welcome to another demonstration of NBP Actions 16 Texture Control Pro. It has been evolving and we've been getting everyone's feedback and we really appreciate everything everyone's been suggesting. Some things are not possible and some things are, and we're just kind of pouring through it and figuring out what people may want. So this is the current next version. And to repeat, what we're doing is with Action 16, we're trying to show the public and the customer base what we're working on to get their feedback up front, to see if we can tailor these action sets to be what people want immediately, right? So we usually will do our in-house testing. We have our beta testers and all that, and we'll come up with all the best ideas we can come up with, release it, and then see what people think. Well, now we're trying a little bit different approach. So some of this comes from your feedback. So we really appreciate that. So if you look at the top right here, we'll see how it's advanced. Some of these we already had, but we didn't demo before. So we have the main orange button on top if you're in button mode. Again, this is a preview, so it's subject to change by the time it gets released, but I'm going to give you another walkthrough of it. NBP Texture Control Pro, and then we have modifiers underneath. Now, similar to what we started on Actions 15, we have these, emojis next to our buttons in button mode. Now, some computers, I understand, especially on Windows, are not showing the emojis properly. Apologies. We'll see if we can get that figured out, or we may have to stop using emojis. I don't know. But regardless, it's just kind of like a faux panel, if you will. So it's easy to work with, easy to develop, very cost effective to develop. We don't need a lot of advanced functions on this that would require a panel. So anyway, all that said, let's go ahead and run NBP Texture Control Pro. As a reminder, it sets up a layer stack. This is one of our Pro series of actions, which means that it sets up these layer stacks that are useful, not just to look cool or to look technical or complicated, but to be useful, okay? I've also set up my layers to show my thumbnails a little bit bigger so we can all see what's going on a little bit better on video. Okay, so now the layer stack is done. And as you can see, it's substantial. There's a lot going on over here, okay? Previous demo showed a little bit. We're going to show a little bit more now and some other choices. Now, a couple of things right out of the gate. The first two buttons underneath is a variation. Rather than have three different actions, three copies of the main action that mask out, the subject and then mask out the skin. If you wanted it, now we can just toggle that. So no matter where you are on your stack while working, if you decide, you know what, I want the subject masked out, you click on Mask Subject on Stack. It'll go through this little process to do that and then mask it on the main stack folder, mask, and then you can keep working. Very, very simple on that. You don't have to have that, of course. You can just reset that. And the same thing works, again, no matter where you are. You just click on Mask Skin on Stack, and it'll do its little process using chroma data to extract skin tone, and there you go. Now, in this shot, it's one of those shots where the skin tone is spilled all over into the sweater and everything else. So a more detailed mask of the skin, if we really wanted it, we could do it manually. But all that notwithstanding, let's go ahead and make it back to normal. Let's review what the whole process does, okay? So let's zoom in a little bit. Let's say here we have all this wonderful texture, okay? And this is even a finished edit, right? So we have texture that we're supposed to be happy with. But let's say we go back in and go, you know what? I want to make a change, or the client requests a change, whether it's the art director or the person in the shot, they request a change. And you're like, oh, I don't want to go back to the main thing. One great tool, one great function of this tool is that you can just control texture no matter what. It is a frequency separation process, but it's a little bit stronger and a little more flexible. Okay. So if we look down here in the bottom, sort of layer, we have the blur operators. To remind you what that is it's a copy of the image with three blur functions on it, blur filters on it: Gaussian, surface blur, and median. Okay. And they're set up to be smart filters, so they can be turned on and off, and their settings can be changed. So for example, if on the mask, I take a white paintbrush and I paint all down here, all her neck and everything else. And we're like, yeah, I want to smooth all this out. And then I'm going to bring back some texture, that I want to bring back. And, in case you wanted something not realistic looking, but you're like, well, Gaussian's not the best choice because in the perimeter of the sweater, I have a blur. Okay. Let's turn off Gaussian and turn on median. And let's see what that does. See, that's a better blur option because the perimeter of the sweater is not, blurred. On top of that, we can go and double click it, increase the radius of our median if we want it even more blurred. See that? Now comes the next choice. We have multiple textures here, and they start with extra high all the way to low. And what that means is that's our frequency, high, a very high frequency or lower frequency. Not really low. They are all in the texture range. These aren't super broad. The blurring handles our low frequency. So these are like ways to sharpen if we wanted to, but ways to recover texture when we've blurred an area. So one way we can do that very, very easily is we can pull down Command or Control, click on the mask of the blur operators that we just made, click it. That'll select the luminosity of that mask. In other words, select the mask. Yes, we went beyond the perimeter into the sweater, but I'm going to guess it won't be a problem. Now we have to kind of decide, well, how much texture do we want to bring back? Let's say we go to extra high. Okay, we're on that mask. We hit Command or Control I right now to make our selection white. Well, there it is. That's extremely high. That's extra high texture. We turn that on and off. You can see there's not a whole lot of extra high in there. And it doesn't really look like we did much. The extra high layer is usually for very fine tuning or sharpening of very, very fine things like hairs and really, just really detailed areas. Great for sharpening and great for recovering in minute amounts. However, it's not quite strong enough. So what we're going to do, we're going to go up to very high. You know what? Let's just go ahead and turn off that one. Do our selection again. Go to very high, invert. There we go. Now we have a little bit more texture. Okay, but let's turn it off and on. Off, on. Now if we zoom out, we realize it's a little too smooth still. So a couple options we can do. Make sure you get yourself familiar with moving masks around. We can hold down Alt or Option and drag this mask into high, which is a broader range of texture. Turn off very high. Let's look at that one. On, off, on, off, on. And if you think it's working, I kind of like it, but I've got some soft areas, I've lost some contrast. A couple of things. You can take the same selection, bring it up here to contrast and invert to get that. Or you can paint in contrast wherever you feel you need to on that layer. Just paint it in wherever you think it should be. And if it's not enough, you can always adjust it. So let's go ahead and adjust it so we can see. A lot of times we want to do that because when we do these blurring and frequency replacement, which is what this is, we sometimes lose a little bit of contrast and it gives us a false positive that it looks wrong. So there it is with the original texture that we edited, and here's a little finer texture, right? So zoom out a little bit. Okay, that's not bad. And then overall, we can do a couple of things too. Remember, it's not just one or nothing. We can go to like texture medium or texture low and experiment what that might look like in certain places, like on these shadows. Because this little shadow and this little highlight, we don't have a lot of texture there. So we can do like a 20% flow and bring in a little bit into the highlights, a little bit there, a little bit there. Everywhere we feel like it's too smooth, we can bring in some lower, medium. It can be medium, low, medium, high, etc. We can bring in multiple types of texture. Now on top, if you have a lot of work that you've been doing, that very top folder of the layer stack is a mask, and you can just use black to clean up areas that you didn't want involved. See? And you can come back here, like, I can turn on high texture again, though, the main one, and block that one off, or excuse me, the original one, very high. And on extra high, we can keep working here. Let's say we want to bring out some extra high minute details in here. Let's see. This is not going to be very visible on the video, guaranteed. Okay. We can go to medium high with like a 10% flow, and we can tweak a couple of texture areas if we want. There we go. Off, on. During all of this, we can also go down to medium and blur some more. So maybe try 25. Super soft, getting a little funky now. So let's go back, maybe 10, 15. Not bad. How about like a 12? And we'll turn on Gaussian. It's probably a low setting, right? Yeah, so we'll put that. Gaussian's going to be a little on the blurry of the corner of the perimeters. I don't really like that blurring of the perimeter there. So sometimes when you mix and match them, it doesn't look too bad, but other times it's a disaster. So let's turn off Gaussian. We definitely don't want that on. There we go. That helps that edge quite a bit. So now we have that, and we can tone down the contrast if we need to. Just zoom out to make sure it works. Yep. So make that like a 60% contrast. There we go. Now we're controlling that. There we go. We are controlling that texture exactly how we want. And we can mix and match too. So if most of our texture isn't this high, right? We can move it to the very high, turn that one off, and now we have very high. It looks a little fake. We can do a combination of both. We can have them both on and make them both 50%. That's going to give us a little bit of both. There we go. See that? So we went from this to this, just refining a certain area that we felt we wanted to do. No problem at all. It looks like it's natural. It works great. And then we can just flatten to a new layer and remove our layer stack work. And now we've done it. We have our work done. And we just controlled that specific texture of that specific area, if that's what we want to do. Can be done before you do any skin work or anything like that. Can be done later. Can be done on non-skin. Can be done on any texture at all that you need to control in some manner, whether you want to do sharpening or whether you want to do smoothing and then texture recovery. So let's go ahead now that we've done it. Let's run it again and do a little bit of sharpening. So we're going to go Texture Control Pro. It does do quite a bit, a lot of extraction. So it takes a few seconds. While I'm recording here on my MacBook, a couple of years old, it takes about 15 seconds or so, maybe sometimes 20. So depending on your computer, it can take 5 seconds or a minute. But the end result is all your options, right? Okay, so let's zoom in. And let's say we want to choose, instead of just sharpening, we can choose medium low and sharpen the eyes quite a bit. Or we can choose very high and sharpen the eyes a little bit more refined. Look at those eyelashes pop. See that? From that to that. See the sharpening that we're doing there? And on top of that, you can be even pickier in a more refined way. Let's say you don't want the eyelashes to be sharpened that way. You want them to be sharpened with extra high. So you put extra high on the eyelashes. And then you choose texture medium for the eyebrows to bring up a bunch of texture in the eyebrows, if that's what you wanted to do, right? And then you can use texture high for the lips and really make them shinier if you want. See that? And now you're sharpening. You're not doing a high pass, and you're not doing it's sort of a high pass, but you're not doing just texture, adding texture in a random way. You're using a frequency separation extracted version of the texture. And depending on the level, you have, very tight texture all the way to a broader texture. So you can choose how much sharpening you want to bring. Now, on top of that, we have some quick buttons. Like, for example, down here, we have linear light textures, hard light textures, and vivid light textures. So I can zoom in just to show you. At any moment, I can choose between linear light, which is the default, or hard light. That's going to change the blend mode of all of them, or vivid light. And you see how the sharpening is changing. Zoom out just a bit. There we go. So linear light, hard light, vivid light. And the reason why we do that is sometimes you want to play around with them until you get the kind of sharpening that you may want. We'll do an exaggeration real quick to show you what I mean. Let's put our cheek here, really strong, crazy sharpening, right? And then we go hard light, changes the vibe. Vivid light changes the vibe. Linear light, ever so slightly. In general, even though they have different sort of formulas that they work with, linear light's going to be the strongest, contrastiest, really exaggerate specular highlights. Hard light's going to be the calmest and, most toned down, and vivid usually is somewhere in between. So you can play around with those depending on specifically the type of blend mode you want to use to show the textures in question, right? And then, of course, we have a reset texture mask. We push that button and all the texture masks go back to black, so we can start over. We can even reset our blur mask the same way. So if I had a blurry area here, I can just say reset blur mask. No matter how many things I've done, I can always just reset that whenever I want. Now, some other functions that are kind of interesting. Let's say I go to texture medium and I paint her cheek, like I said. Let's say both cheeks and exaggerate it. But I decide to myself, what I really want is to try to get some texture into those highlights, but I don't want it everywhere else. So what I can do is I can choose immediately while on the layer. I can choose deep shadows or regular shadows or shadow sweep. That's if I wanted to shoot, bring in the sharpness or the area that I've masked. I want to focus on shadows using blend diff, or highlights, or highlight sweep, which is a broader highlight, or really bright highlights. Okay. So there it is with the really bright highlights, only sharpening or using what's on that layer and the really bright highlights. Or I can choose a little broader highlights. There we go. Now I'm only sharpening the highlights. And no matter where else I use that layer, I'm only sharpening highlights. I can very quickly sharpen highlights and not worry about sharpening anything else. And I can always toggle it. The brightest ones, a little wider. Let me show you. A little wider, the medium highlights, and the brightest highlights. I can always do that whenever I want. See that? And if I work with that and I'm experimenting and I try this layer here with the low layer, and I come over here and I have it really dark and I have it on the shadows, and I think to myself, well, okay, that looks okay, but I don't know, I've kind of messed this up. You know what I'm going to do? Reset all blend diff and reset all texture mask and reset blur mask. See, it's like a quasi panel. So this is where we are right now. It's got a lot of cool, sort of options to keep you going, and so you can explore texture on this layer stack. We're going to have some manual options, kind of a semi-automatic, so you can choose the settings that you want if you want to go that route. But this is currently where we are on Action 16 Texture Control Pro. Any further comments or questions, drop us an email, nbp@ninobatista.com, or leave a comment wherever you're watching this video. Thanks, guys.